Okay, we're back, and this time we're doing a little bit of PowerShell. It is obviously SQL based. This is kind of just basic, very basic PowerShell. This is kind of what I use just to connect to one SQL server, grab some data, suck it back in and throw it into another table. So this is just kind of connecting two SQL servers together with PowerShell. It's nice and easy. The kind of main use case is really if you've got like a central logging server and you want to go out to another machine, go grab some data, pull it back and put it in a table. Easiest way, especially if you're cycling through a list of servers, is just using PowerShell. Now, this is my method of doing it. There are other ones out there. I'm not going to say this is the best, it's just one I use. For example, there is a module for PowerShell called DBA Tools. It is amazing. It does so much stuff, but I've had the odd issue with it where, for example, there are companies who won't allow you to install it because it's an external module. I've actually had issues with SQL Server Agent and trying to get it to actually run some of the commands, because even though I can install it quite happily as just me, if I try and install it for all users, I end up getting issues or crashing, so I've had issues. So I can't necessarily get SQL Agent to run it all the time, whereas SQL Agent will happily run native raw PowerShell. So I kind of find this is the easiest way to kind of do this. So today we're going to do the dark side of PowerShell. So here we have PowerShell. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be getting data from a SQL server and putting it into a SQL server. So luckily, we get to start with SQL. So I have a database. It's called TestDB. It's just test database. If you can't work that out, drop off now. So I'm going to get rid of my table first, in case it already exists, because it's just cleaner that way. So I'm going to dump that. Now this is the kind of query I'm going to be running just to pull in my data. This isn't the kind of query I'd run in the real world. I would use wait stats, but not like this. I mean, this is a very butchered small version of a query just so that I can actually have something to run. So you can kind of see the data this will pull back. We've got, a date, server name, wait type name, and then a few big ints, well, numbers. So I'm going to create a table to hold this. You can see that this kind of tallies up nicely with the exact columns. I've made it nice and easy just so you can follow it along. So I'm just going to create a table, and that is obviously going to be empty. Good starting point. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this query, because we're going to need this in a second when we start writing PowerShell. So here's my PowerShell. First thing first, I am going to create my query as an object, just because we're going to need a query. So how do we now connect? Well, the easiest way in the world to connect is just invoke a SQL command, and then we just say server instance Monty Burns, because everything in my world is Springfield and Simpsons, if you can't already guess or haven't worked it out or spotted it from my other instances. So don't ask. So we're going to use Monty to connect to. So what I'm going to do is just pass it that query. Okay, simple as that. So if I now run this, you'll see we get results back. Okay, world is good, world is happy. Now, the downside is obviously this is using Windows authentication. We can't always rely on that, especially if we're running it, for example, in SQL Agent. I mean, you can obviously proxy it and other such things, but just to run it natively through its account, it's easier just to actually have a SQL Server login. So we can do that as well, that's not a problem. We can stick a username on. So I have a PowerShell user, and I have a password, which is SQL training 123. Yes, it is a demo account. I will be destroying it straight after this. I mean, I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb, so that will be destroyed. But for the moment, it works nicely. So let's run this. And there we go. You can see that worked fine. We've still got our results coming back. Okay, nice and happy. Now, sometimes we kind of want to do this in a slightly different manner. If you don't want to write it in this format, you can write the good old way of having a connection string. And I've copied this because I didn't want to have to type this out, but the good old connection string that you're all kind of familiar with. You've got your data source, initial catalog, user ID, password, etc. So if I now swap out a big chunk of this query, and instead I leave it as connection string and just put in my connection string. Okay, if I now run this, you'll see that runs exactly the same, just as well. It's all good. Okay, and I'm going to stick with this method for the moment just because it's easier. So you can kind of see that's easy enough to go and get data. Now the downside is that that's not the best way of kind of getting data, because to put that into another table is quite tricky. So what we can do is we can actually kind of tweak this a little bit. So I'm going to add in a data set, and for this I'm going to have a new object, and it's going to be a system.data.dataset. Now if anyone has ever actually used kind of C# and stuff, this will be pretty familiar. So we're just basically creating a new object of type dataset, and I'm calling the object dataset because it's easier that way. So what I can now do is I can say, okay, return my data to the dataset, and on this I'm going to put output as dataset, just so everything is nice and compatible. Everything's going to work nicely. Okay. Now if I run that, that will work absolutely fine. I can't prove it, but it did. So what I'm going to do is prove it. Now, if I was then to kind of just write out to the screen just a few of the kind of records, so you can kind of see here from my data set I'm getting table 0, which is just my result set. You can return multiple result sets into a data set, which is handy. This is just table 0 because it's the main data set that comes out, the first one. And I'm going to take the row 0, 0, row 0, 1, row 0, 2. So basically it's the first line, and then those are the columns. So this is basically kind of line and column, so row and column. So if I now run this whole thing, you'll actually see that there you go. It actually pulls back my current date, my server name, and the weight type. So it is pulling back in a tabular format, which is good, because if it's in a tabular format, we can use a tabular format, throw it at a table. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we are just going to add a new connection, and this is to my central server. This is my like central logging server, so I'll just call it central connection. Obviously you can call it what you like, but this is going to my instance on which we actually created that empty import data table using the same user and password. And what I can now do, obviously I want to get rid of this, is I now basically just want to bulk copy the data in. So what I'm going to do now is create bulk copy as a new object, and it is going to be a bulk copy object, and it's going to use that connection. So basically I'm going to say, okay, create me a bulk copy object using this connection. So it's basically going to open a connection and say, okay, this is the pipe I'm going to throw the bulk copy down and hope it hits. And that pipe is the one that goes to my instance, to my database, using my user and password. So it should be fine. And then what I'm going to say is, okay, the destination table, the one you're heading to, is called import data. If we were to ping back, you will see that it is called import data quite correctly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say write just the table that you've got, the first table, the one table, because I'm only running one query. It's table 0. It's the one table that's coming back. Just write that, throw it down the pipe, see what sticks. Okay, if I run that, nothing comes back on screen, no errors, no anything, so that's all good. Go over to SQL Server, now run this, and we have data. Okay, it's just piled it in. So you can see that's really, really easy. We've just got a query, and then basically it's just connection strings, and then you just say, okay, I want to get a data set out, and I want to throw it down into a table. And that's it. That will move your data around nice and quickly and easily. Now the other fun thing you can do is if I kind of tweak this slightly, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, let's stick that there, so you can see I've now added another query in, so we're now going to get 2 result sets back. Okay, so when this data set runs, it's actually going to get 2 tables come back, one table for this query and one table for this query. Okay, so that means what we can now do is actually access that other table as well. We don't have to. I can run this just fine, and you'll see that runs. That's all good. And if I go over to my SQL Server, you'll see that we've now doubled up the data. So it will actually just keep running. You don't have to access all the tables that come out, but the data set will store them. So what we're going to do is truncate this so it's nice and blank. We like that to be blank. There we go. And then I'm going to drop and recreate a new table. And you can see that basically this is just server name and database name. This is going to hold the results of our secondary query. So what I can now do is say, okay, I've got my pipe open that I'm going to bulk copy and throw stuff down. I'm going to throw at this table this data set, and I'm going to throw at this table the next data set. Now obviously because it's computing, this is 0 based, so this is effectively table 1 and table 2. Okay, so I'm going to throw the first table at import data and the second table, which is this one, at my new table. So if I run that, that works fine. And if we go back to our tables, you can see, there we go, we have now both of them are populated. So like I said, it's a really, really easy and nice way of just being able to kind of pass data around from one system to another without too much of an issue. It's really clean, it's really clear, you can't really go wrong with it. Now, I have to say there is one huge glaring issue here, and if you haven't spotted it, then go and have a look harder, because it's a major problem. I have that in plain text in a PowerShell script. Okay, that is not good. I mean, that's probably a fireable offense. To be honest, in PowerShell, it's very, very hard when you're going to a SQL Server to hide your password. SQL Server only ever accepts plain text. So at some point you have to give it a plain text password, but you can at least make it difficult for people. You don't want to do this. I mean, just do not do this. It's crazy. Don't put a plain text password just in your PS1 file, or anywhere else. It can just be read straight out. At least make it difficult for someone to get. So the reason I said at the start that this is going to be a two-parter is because the second part is going to basically be how we do this with the password, how we actually try and hide it a little bit, just to make it a bit more tricky for people to get hold of it, and basically so we don't have its plain text in our file. I mean, like I said, that's just crazy. So yeah, I will hopefully see you around for part 2 when we do that bit, and as usual, in the meantime, if you want any resources, you want to go over this again, I do have it in a blog on my website. We've got other resources, we do consulting, SQL support, courses, all manner of stuff, sqltraining.co.uk. Head over, there's also stuff in the links of and description of this video. So yeah, I'll see you for the second part soon.